Catherine had lived 7 years of anguish and uncertainty. After her husband Daniel and daughter CLA disappeared during a family vacation on a cruise ship, her world had shattered. The case, as it stretched on without any resolution, became a dark cloud that overshadowed every part of her life. The authorities had given up. The case had grown cold, the leads had dried up, and the detectives had moved on to other cases. But Catherine couldn't. She wasn't willing to let go. She spent every day after their disappearance searching for any sign, clinging to the faint hope that she might someday hear something, anything, that would bring them back. For years, she posted missing person flyers, talked to anyone who would listen, and fought back the sinking feeling that her family was lost to her forever. Even as the days turned into months and the months turned into years, Catherine's determination never faltered. She felt her heart break over and over again, but she would not surrender. On that fateful morning, as she sat in her living room listening to yet another cold report from a detective, something unexpected happened. A phone call came through. The woman on the other end of the line introduced herself as Sophia Van Dyke, and she claimed she had seen a woman who matched CLA's description in Amsterdam. For a moment, Catherine hesitated. Her mind raced with doubts. She had been through so many false alarms, so many empty promises over the years. But something about the way Sophia spoke, her conviction, made Catherine pause. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the lead she had been waiting for. Without a second thought, Catherine made up her mind. She booked a flight to Amsterdam that very day, ready to follow this new lead, even if it seemed like another long shot. The hope that had been buried deep in her heart sparked again. It felt like the weight of 7 years had finally shifted. She had no idea what was waiting for her on the other side, but for the first time in a long while, Catherine allowed herself to believe. Catherine arrived in Amsterdam with a mix of anticipation and disbelief. The city was bustling, full of life, but to her it felt like she was moving through a dream. The weight of the past 7 years hung heavy on her shoulders, yet she couldn't shake the tiny spark of hope ignited by Sophia's call. She had no idea if this was the beginning of a new chapter or yet another heartbreak. Sophia met her at the airport, a stranger who had already become her last hope. Catherine's hands shook as they exchanged introductions. Sophia was kind, patient, and eager to help. But Catherine could see the concern in her eyes. There was no guarantee, no promise that this would work out, and yet Catherine had no choice but to trust. The days of endless searching had led her here, and she couldn't walk away now. Sophia explained that she had seen CLA's face in posters in Orlando, and then later, when she was back in Amsterdam, noticed a woman who looked just like her. Catherine's heart fluttered at the idea of a potential sighting. The two women began their journey through the city, visiting cafes and streets where Sophia believed she had seen CLA. Each place felt like a long shot, but Catherine couldn't bring herself to give up. Every new lead was a small glimmer of light, and for Catherine, even that small light felt worth chasing. They went to a bar where Sophia was sure she had seen the woman. The bartender's refusal to recognize CLA's face didn't stop them. Catherine had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. The sense of urgency continued to grow, and Sophia led her down streets she had never seen before. They reached a part of the city Catherine had only heard of, the infamous red light district. Sophia suggested they be cautious. This part of the city wasn't one for casual questioning, and Catherine, though nervous, trusted Sophia. They weren't there for anything illegal, just a mother searching for her daughter. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with tension. The unfamiliar neon lights and the energy of the streets felt like they were closing in around Catherine. But she couldn't back down now. Her daughter might be out there. Every step she took, every new corner they turned, was one step closer to finding the truth. The city seemed vast, but Catherine felt the weight of it all. Every building, every alley, felt like a potential clue. She couldn't let herself stop now, not after all these years. As Catherine and Sophia continued their search through the district, the uncertainty of what lay ahead intensified. The bustling energy of the area only made Catherine feel more isolated, her mind constantly racing with questions. Could this really be the place? Was CLA really out here somewhere among the crowds hiding in plain sight? They turned down a quieter alley, a stark contrast to the neon-lit chaos of the streets just beyond. Catherine's heart pounded in her chest as she followed Sophia, who seemed to have an almost instinctual sense of direction. It was as if she knew this city better than her own, guiding Catherine through these unfamiliar streets with quiet confidence. And then, without warning, Sophia stopped. She froze, her eyes locked onto a window just ahead. Catherine, distracted by her own worries, didn't notice at first that she had walked a few steps ahead. When she turned around at the sound of Sophia's voice calling her back, she saw that Sophia's attention was focused entirely on the building in front of them. There was a woman sitting by the window, her silhouette faint but unmistakable. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. Something about the woman's posture, the way she held herself, felt eerily familiar. It was as if time itself had stopped for a moment. Catherine's heart leaped into her throat as she approached the window, her legs moving before she could even think. The woman inside was dressed in simple clothes, not anything extravagant, but something about her demeanor struck Catherine. Could it really be her? Could this be her daughter? The girl she had been searching for? The girl who had been stolen from her? Catherine pressed her face against the glass, straining to see more clearly. The woman didn't look up, her expression vacant as if she was lost in a world of her own. Catherine knocked lightly on the window, holding her breath. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the moment she had been praying for. But there was no response. Catherine's frustration began to grow. Why couldn't she just turn around, look her in the eyes, and recognize her mother? She knocked again, harder this time, a wave of desperation rising within her. Her hands were trembling as she struggled to make sense of what was happening. The woman inside didn't react at all. It was as if Catherine wasn't even there. But then, out of nowhere, a man appeared from behind the door. His presence was abrupt, imposing, and his gaze was cold as he looked straight at Catherine. He didn't say a word, but his body language made it clear that she was unwelcome. Catherine's heart sank. Something didn't feel right, but she couldn't explain why. Catherine felt a rush of panic as the man stepped forward, his expression unreadable, his eyes sharp with a mix of curiosity and authority. She instinctively took a step back, but she wasn't ready to give up yet. The woman inside, the one she was certain was her daughter, was so close, just beyond the glass. How could she walk away now? But the man, his size and demeanor more intimidating up close, blocked her path. "This isn't the place for disturbances," he said, his voice low and firm. Catherine felt a mix of fear and frustration welling up inside her. She wasn't causing trouble. She was just a mother desperate to find her daughter. She opened her mouth to respond, but the words got stuck in her throat. Instead, she just pointed to the woman at the window. "That's my daughter. Please, you have to help me," she pleaded, her voice trembling, but desperate. The man's face remained unchanged, almost as if he wasn't even listening. He was not the one Catherine needed to convince. But just as she was about to speak again, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Sophia, calm and composed, stepped in between Catherine and the man. "We're looking for this woman," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We believe she's the missing person we've been searching for. This is CLA Wilson." Catherine could hardly breathe as she watched the scene unfold. The man didn't seem moved by Sophia's words. In fact, he looked almost amused. He sneered and shook his head. "Her name's not CLA. It's Tracy," he said with a dismissive laugh. Catherine's heart dropped. No, that's not possible," she muttered under her breath, shaking her head in disbelief. But the man was already dismissing her. Catherine was about to speak again when the sound of approaching sirens interrupted them. The man's expression changed almost instantly. The smirk faded, and he glanced over his shoulder nervously. Without a word, he grabbed the woman, Tracy, and began pulling her towards the back of the building. Catherine's heart raced. This couldn't be happening. Was she about to lose her daughter again, just when she was so close? Her body moved before her mind could catch up. She reached out, calling out to the woman inside, "KLA, it's me, please look at me." But Tracy's face remained blank, her gaze distant, as if she couldn't hear Catherine at all. In a flash, the man and Tracy were disappearing into the building, and Catherine felt a gut-wrenching helplessness sweep over her. Just as the man reached for the door, the police arrived. Officers flooded the street, their presence commanding and urgent. Catherine's eyes locked on Tracy one last time, hoping, praying that this time, this moment was different. She held her breath as the officers made their move. The officers moved quickly, surrounding the man who had been dragging Tracy away. Catherine could see the fear and confusion in Tracy's eyes, but her heart ached even more as she realized the woman still hadn't recognized her. The man was trying to remain calm, but the tension in the air was thick. The officer's commands were clear, and within seconds he was handcuffed and placed under arrest. Catherine didn't know what to feel. Her body was frozen with shock, but at the same time, she couldn't tear her eyes away from Tracy. Was this really her daughter? Her mind raced with every possibility, but her gut told her something wasn't right. Tracy had changed. No longer the bright, hopeful young woman she had once known, but someone different. The woman in front of her was barely a shadow of the child Catherine had raised, and it made her question everything. Catherine was too caught up in the chaos to notice the officers guiding her toward the waiting patrol car. She only broke her gaze with Tracy when Sophia gently touched her arm. Catherine looked up at Sophia, her face a mix of exhaustion and hope. Sophia, ever the calm presence, gave her a reassuring smile, but even she couldn't hide the concern in her eyes. "We're getting closer, Catherine. We need to trust the process." Catherine nodded, though she wasn't sure what trusting the process meant anymore. She had spent years trusting the authorities, trusting in their promises that they would find her family. And now, here she was, unsure if this was even her daughter. What if it wasn't? What if this was all a mistake? She couldn't afford to go through another loss, another disappointment. As they drove through the streets, Catherine's thoughts were all over the place. The sirens wailing in the distance only made her feel more helpless, more unsure of what the future held. They arrived at a medical facility, a small clinic nearby where the officers took Tracy inside for further evaluation. Catherine and Sophia sat in the waiting room, the minutes feeling like hours. Catherine couldn't sit still. She paced back and forth, her mind never quiet. She thought back to everything that had led her here, the years of pain, of searching, of clinging to the belief that she would find her daughter again. She didn't know if this was going to be the reunion she had dreamed of, but she knew she couldn't give up. Not now. Catherine could barely sit still, her hands fidgeting as she waited for any kind of update. The sterile, cold waiting room felt like a prison. Every minute that passed felt like an eternity. She kept glancing at the clock on the wall, counting the seconds, but none of it made the time go faster. Her thoughts raced through every moment of the day. The call from Sophia, the long flight to Amsterdam, the frantic search through the streets, the encounter with the man, the arrest, and now, waiting in this sterile room for something that would change everything. She couldn't stop imagining what might be happening to Tracy inside that clinic. Was she undergoing some kind of medical exam? Or were the doctors just trying to stabilize her? Catherine didn't know, but the weight of the uncertainty was unbearable. Sophia sat next to her, her silence a quiet support. Catherine didn't know how Sophia managed to stay so composed in the face of it all. She could feel the tension in the air, could sense that the same question was on both of their minds. Was this really her daughter? And if it was, what kind of life had she lived? How could Catherine even begin to understand what Tracy had gone through? The memories of the girl Catherine once knew, CLA, vibrant and full of life, seemed so distant now. Everything had changed. And then, just as the weight of it all felt like it might crush Catherine, a nurse entered the waiting room. Her expression was grave, her eyes soft with sympathy. Catherine stood up immediately, her breath catching in her throat. "Is she?" Catherine couldn't finish the question. The nurse's response was slow, as though she were choosing her words carefully. "We've run some tests and we've identified her. Her name is Erin Jansen, but she was once known as CLA Wilson. We've confirmed her identity through her records." Catherine's knees nearly buckled under her. She had heard the words, but they felt impossible to process. Erin, but also CLA. It was her. Catherine didn't know how to react. Her mind spun in circles, and yet there was relief too, mixed with the overwhelming sadness. Her daughter, the little girl she had once known, was here, alive, but broken. The nurse added one more thing, almost as an afterthought. "She's been through a lot, ma'am. She's under the influence of something. She'll need time." Catherine's heart ached. The years of searching, of wondering where her daughter had gone, had led to this moment. But it wasn't the reunion she had hoped for. Tracy, or Erin, was here, but she was not the girl Catherine had once known. Catherine nodded numbly, her mind processing the new information. She wanted to run to her daughter, wrap her in her arms, but she knew it wasn't that simple. Tracy wasn't ready. Tracy had suffered. Catherine wiped the tears from her eyes. She had finally found her daughter, but the journey was far from over. As Catherine followed the nurse down the sterile hallway, she felt like she was walking through a fog. Every step seemed disconnected, her thoughts scattered. The idea of seeing Tracy again, finally, after all this time, was overwhelming. But there was something else lingering, an unshakable fear. What if Tracy didn't remember her? What if, after all the years, after all the trauma, her daughter had lost that bond they once shared? Catherine's heart pounded in her chest as the nurse led her to a small room at the back of the clinic. She paused at the door, taking a deep breath before stepping inside. There, sitting on a bed with her back turned, was the woman Catherine had been searching for. Tracy, or Erin, looked so different. The woman in front of her had the same blonde hair, the same delicate features, but her eyes, they were vacant. Catherine's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer. She didn't know what to say, how to reach out to this broken version of the girl she had once raised. Tracy, no, Erin, looked up, her gaze distant, unfocused. She didn't seem to register Catherine's presence right away. For a brief moment, Catherine wondered if she was even in the right room, if this was really her daughter at all. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, as Catherine stood frozen in place. Finally, Tracy's eyes seemed to focus a little. She blinked, her expression slowly turning from confusion to recognition. Catherine's heart skipped a beat. "Mom?" Tracy's voice was barely a whisper, cracked and unsure. But in that one word, Catherine's world shifted. It was her. Her daughter. She had found her. But the girl sitting before her wasn't the same girl she had lost all those years ago. Tracy's voice trembled as she repeated, "Is it really you?" Catherine nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She took a step forward, hesitant, as if afraid that anything she did might break the fragile connection that had just been reestablished. She had spent 7 long years searching, hoping, praying for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the wave of emotion that washed over her now. Tracy didn't move at first, and Catherine felt the weight of the years between them. There had been so much pain, so many unanswered questions, and now there were only more. But Catherine had found her daughter, and that was all that mattered. Tracy finally stood, her body unsteady, as though she wasn't sure how to move forward. Catherine opened her arms, and for the first time in years, Tracy took a step toward her. They embraced, and Catherine held her tightly, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. She had found her daughter, but the journey was far from over. Catherine held Tracy as if she could somehow make up for the lost time, the years that had slipped away like sand through her fingers. Tracy's body felt fragile, almost broken. But there was a warmth, a familiar sense that Catherine hadn't realized she was missing until now. It was overwhelming, a flood of emotions that she couldn't sort through fast enough. There were tears, but they weren't just from sadness, they were from relief, from finally holding her daughter again. But even in this moment of reunion, The reality of the situation hit hard. Tracy, CLA, wasn't the same person Catherine remembered. Her daughter's eyes were dull, her voice shaky, and the way she held herself was almost foreign to Catherine. Tracy had been through so much. Catherine knew that, but it didn't make it easier to face. After a long moment, Catherine pulled away, her hands gently cupping Tracy's face. She studied her daughter's features, the subtle changes that came with time, but more than that, she noticed the weariness that had settled into her eyes, the pain, the trauma that Tracy had experienced. It was all there. Catherine had known it would be difficult, but seeing her daughter like this made it so real. Tracy hadn't just been lost to the world, she had been broken by it. Catherine's heart ached for her, but even in this fragile moment, Catherine couldn't afford to let her grief overwhelm her. She had found Tracy, and that was a victory, no matter how bittersweet. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," Catherine whispered, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I never gave up. I never stopped looking for you." Tracy's eyes flickered with something, an emotion that Catherine couldn't quite place. Was it anger, sadness, or something else? "You found me," Tracy said softly, her voice distant, almost empty. "But I'm not the person you're looking for. I'm not her anymore." Catherine's heart shattered as she heard the words. She hadn't expected a fairy tale reunion, but hearing her daughter say she wasn't the same person, it was like a punch to the gut. Tracy wasn't the girl Catherine had raised. But Catherine didn't care. She wasn't looking for the past. She was looking for her daughter, for the chance to help her heal, to help them both heal. The past couldn't be changed, but the future, there was still hope for that. Catherine squeezed Tracy's hands tightly, offering her a soft smile despite the pain she felt. "You don't have to be who you were. You just need to be here now," Catherine whispered. The journey wasn't over. It had just begun. The days that followed the reunion were a blur of emotions and procedures, all of which felt like too much for Catherine to process. There was a whirlwind of paperwork, police interviews, medical assessments, and meetings with social workers. It felt like they were being pulled in every direction, but through it all, Catherine remained focused on one thing: getting her daughter the help she needed. She spent every moment by Tracy's side, watching her carefully, trying to understand what had happened to her over the years. Tracy had started to open up, bit by bit, but every conversation felt like walking on fragile ground. Catherine learned the horrors Tracy had been through, but it was never easy to hear. It was like a nightmare that had lasted for years, and even though Tracy was physically alive, part of her had been lost long before Catherine ever found her. The hardest part was watching Tracy try to process everything, trying to remember who she was before all the trauma. Catherine knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The memories of what Tracy had endured were still raw, still haunting her. But Catherine wasn't going to let her go again. This time she would fight with everything she had to help her daughter heal. The authorities were working to dismantle the trafficking ring that had kept Tracy captive for so long, and Catherine tried to hold on to the hope that justice would be served. But it wasn't just about the criminals, it was about Tracy, about giving her the space to rebuild herself, to reclaim who she was meant to be. Catherine couldn't undo the past, but she could help Tracy move forward, and that was all that mattered. Every time she looked at her daughter, she saw traces of the girl she had raised, the smile that would flicker on her face when something funny happened, the way she'd hesitate before speaking as if still uncertain of the world around her. Catherine took it one day at a time, never rushing Tracy, always reminding her that no matter how lost the past had seemed, the future was still there, waiting. Catherine knew it wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that they had both been through the worst. Together they would face whatever came next, and no matter how long it took, Catherine would be there for Tracy, never again letting go. The long road to recovery was never straightforward, but it was a road Catherine was willing to walk with her daughter every step of the way. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, they began to adjust to the life that had been waiting for them on the other side of that darkness. Catherine watched Tracy slowly regain parts of herself that she had thought were lost forever. There were good days and bad days, Moments when Tracy would smile genuinely, and moments when she would withdraw, her past closing in around her like a suffocating cloud. But through it all, Catherine never stopped supporting her. She would hold Tracy when the nightmares came, when the memories were too overwhelming, and she would cheer her on when Tracy made small steps toward healing. No one could understand the depth of the pain Tracy had gone through, but Catherine had learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding the strength to live despite it. There were times when Catherine doubted herself, wondering if she was doing enough, but she always came back to the same truth. She was here for Tracy, and that was all that mattered. The journey had been long and painful, but Catherine had learned to take it day by day, not rushing the process, not forcing Tracy to be anything other than who she was. They both had a long way to go, but Catherine could see the flickers of light returning in Tracy's eyes. The pain might never completely disappear, but together they had learned to live with it. And that was enough. For the first time in 7 years, Catherine finally allowed herself to breathe a little easier, knowing that her daughter was safe, and no matter how hard the road ahead might be, they would face it together. The love that had never wavered, even in the darkest times, was the foundation of their healing. They weren't the same people they had been before, but maybe that was okay. They had each other, and that made all the difference.